Hey guys, Mochi here, and we're back with the Bloodcraft Steel Rebellion Take 2 Draft Infographic update. So Bloodcraft you might consider to be one of the biggest winners in Steel Rebellion, maybe because you see a constructed deck based around Machina cards, maybe some of the Evo Matters synergy neutrals, as well as the Destructive Succubus. But these cards don't really translate too well into Take 2, and the actual cards they got sort of in the general / value sense weren't actually that much, and as you'll soon sort of see. So starting off with the mono, this card, constructed-wise, you know it's sort of the mainstay of the Machina Blood deck. It's sort of one of the win conditions you can get for just dropping a bunch of Machinas alongside it and then evoing them all with the Alpha Drive. In Take 2, you have to rely on just drafting a lot of Armored Bats for this to work. They have to be drawn in a good order, and they also have to all die. And then you also can't be pressured to put the mono down. In Constructed, you have the benefit of this being sort of 3 lines of the card, so you can just throw it down as a 2-drop whenever if you really need to. But in Take 2, you have to throw it down whenever. It even has the detriment of not being able to evo. If you have to just drop down maybe 2-drop, 2-drop, or maybe like a 3-drop, 2-drop, and you really need to evo the mono for some reason, then it actually can't evo just because of its clause right here where it can't be evoed. Even stuff like the core and the desire, if these recover evo points, these don't straight up evo the cards. If Blood ever gets a card that's like sort of like Gramarye, maybe in the low rarity slots, that's actually like really premium, then maybe this card can go up, just because it would be like extremely premium just being a 2-play.66 Storm Ward. But just being sort of that 7-play.66 Storm Ward, it's not good enough, especially being super conditional on just drafting a ton of these cards to die, where you can just draft some like really expensive good stuff in Blood anyway. While it is sort of lacking, there are some just good mid-range options in the 5+ play point slots that you'd rather just dodge just getting a 2-drop, just because you can just take enough like decent 2-drops that'll fill the role perfectly, just because this has the detriment of having a non-evo clause on it. Alright, next up we got the Dual Blame. So I'm actually going to cover these mini expansion cards, mainly because they don't conflict with the template. Maybe that's partly because Blood's Golden Legendary pool is actually very weak. You consider like only like 5 drops here and like some semi-premium cards here. It actually relies a lot on just general good stuff neutrals to sort of fill in its quality. So, the Dual Blame. This card's very interesting. Unfortunately, it's like similar to sort of the Vira and the Vala. If you've seen the previous Blood video, I say these cards are good cards, but they're sort of bad to draft just because, they have problems coming out on 2, where Blood already has problems sort of playing cards, playing regular 2-drops, playing regular 3-drops, that sometimes they just weave out on curve and they do nothing. I'm sure as Blood mains or just Blood players in general, they're tired of seeing sort of this clause on sort of low drops, just because when you play it, you're obviously probably not in Vengeance, so this will trigger and do absolutely nothing. So unfortunately, it has sort of an evo built into it, so you can just evo it and then you'll get the 2-drop regardless. So one of them's like a Blood Wolf that doesn't have the detriment / mini upside of hitting your face for 2, so it's just a 2-1 Storm. And then the other one's a 1-2 ward, and then it has a clause where it pings a thing that has 1 attack or 1 defense, so it'll kill that thing. Sort of like the old Owlcat Clash, but it's just a fanfare. So it's actually reasonably strong as sort of the 4-4 and make a 1-2 ward. Most of the time you'll make the 1-2 ward, and then try to kill something from that, and then it's like decent for split board. It has a detriment of not being maybe something like Dragoncraft's Machina Faller, where it can actually just spawn multiple things for only 2 play points. You actually have to commit the full 4 play points to it, but that's more because it's like super premium. This is still like a reasonable value body. Maybe you'll hold the Owlcat for later for like a ping / kill spell later, and then maybe defend something with a ward, and then sometimes you can use the 2-1 for reach. So it's like reasonably solid in the value sense. You'll pick it around here mainly just because it's clunky as sort of a 2-drop, and it doesn't always get its sort of value effects. Alright, next up we got the Slain. Very similar to Runecraft's Chimera, just 6.66 do nothing. Very fitting that it's next to the Mill Nerd, because this one's conditional on you having no cards in your hand, and this one's sort of conditional on you having a lot of cards in your hand. If you're lucky, maybe you're playing a really value game, maybe you have a bunch of Pack-Bound Demons or drawing off the Alexandrite or something, and then you have like 7+, and this can be like a 6/6 drain. It can be really premium against sort of board flooded crafts or other aggressive crafts that maybe are chipping in for a lot of damage, especially with your own self-damage burn. So you might actually be at like a semi-low life total, and if this evos or even crashes in regularly for 6 or 8 and heals you a bunch, that can just seal the game from that. But most of the time it probably won't activate. It'll just be like a 6-1 and 6/6 vanilla, and that's like reasonable enough. And it has the additional bonus, this should be just a vanilla text most of the time. You don't have like the sort of Robogoblin repair mode spam that other crafts might be able to get, like Haven or something, and you definitely won't be keeping stuff like Armored Bats in your hand as well. So it's unfortunate that it doesn't have maybe sort sort of the mono clause where this might actually be able to proc. So the Rush and Storm, maybe in a rare situation will happen, but most of the time it won't happen. And you'll be reasonably happy of just taking it as like a 6.66 vanilla. Alright, next up we got the Succubus. So this card's actually interesting. You might consider, wow, this card's actually amazing. It's amazing when it procs the Vengeance, which is inconsistent. Mainly you look at it sort of as the 10 play point 6/6, and then it deals 3 to everything. And then it has sort of like the Azzy clause, where every time you evo it, you can evo your stuff, you can discount it by 1. So Azzy was actually not a very good card in Dragoncraft, mainly because you couldn't really keep it in your hand. The aggressive decks just wanted to top deck it, and sort of the ramp control-y decks, you couldn't even just keep it in your hand because you're too busy just staving off like aggro and just being defensive in general. So the Azzy didn't really help you. This one has the benefit of actually like clearing stuff just because it has an AoE attached. But the main problem is sort of the discount clause attached to it. You still don't want to keep this card in the early game, and Arian's like too similar to this card, like 6 play point AoE, or 6/6 AoE 3, and then compared to 5/5 that AoE's 2. Most of the time they clear very similar things. If the Vengeance proc isn't active, it's inconsistent, like I said. So if it isn't active, then it doesn't have that premium make the Serpents give it ward. And the fact that you can just draft Arians, you can draft 1 or 2 Arians, you probably don't even want a lot of these big expensive cards in your deck, and you definitely don't want to keep this card in your mulligan. And especially in not constructed, in Take 2, where you don't have sort of those Evo synergies like the extra Heinecker, the monos to Evo, like a bunch of armored bats / assembly droids that are on board, you won't be able to discount this to like 4 or 5 like you do in constructed. So just because most of the time it'll just rot in hand as sort of like a 8 to 9 drop if you're lucky, and then still sort of situational to get out, means it's sort of down here. Mainly just the Arian comparison, as well as just not being as strong as it is in constructed. Speaking of a card that's not as strong as it is in constructed, the Unleash the Nightmare. This card's actually very similar to a card we've had in the past. It's the Trial of Gorgons. It's a 3 play point spell that spawned the 2 their serpents, and then you could get one of the 3 cards, the Medusa, the 3/3 that was like a floral, and then the 2/3 Bane that gave some random protection to something, as well as the Sethano, which was the really premium 7-drop that pinged for 2 and made serpents. So that card actually drew like 3 really good cards. This card just draws 2 random cards from your deck. While the card draw is very nice, it filters your deck, it makes you actually like maybe draw your other power cards much easier. Most of the time the assembly droids and the force bats, they don't really matter. Maybe you have like a mono in your deck, maybe you have like a metal blade evo / the draws that make it actually important. But most of the time you're just getting like a 3 play point to put 2/2 like 1/1 2 1/1s on board, as well as just get a bunch of value. And then it's like decent for anti-tempo. It's a lot worse than it's actually played. It's mainly because Blood just doesn't have a lot of good goldens and legendaries that just ends up here, just because it helps with the board flood plan and then keeps you up in value. So that's not a thing that not a lot of Blood cards can sort of say. So it'll definitely be like up here in the value sense, just because it's aggressive enough and it's good enough in the value plan. Last up for the golden legendaries, we got the Medusa. So it's a 5 play point 2/4, very similar to sort of a Celia that's enhanced for sword. It spawns 3 1/1s instead, but most of the time it's just for the board flood application. This one puts 4 bodies on board, which is very strong. You can do the thing where you evo sort of the 1/1 into a 3/3 and then trade in, but most of the time you try to evo this body itself to get the 4/6, as well as just get the free evo from this. This gives you a Medusiana into your hand, so it's the 8 play point 1/7 that gets the triple attack. You can maybe like buff it from hand, or maybe you can just play it down, trade with 2 mid-range followers or a bunch of small followers, and then have the 1x left over to trade with stuff later. And then this being a really strong 5 or 6 drop, just playing it down, evoing it, and then at the end of the turn, if this lives, which most of the time it will, just because it has reasonable defense, being a 4/6 after evoing, it'll give sort of 2 inherited keywords to your serpents. So this can land on the same one or can land on different ones. Either way, it's like reasonably solid. Having like sort of a 1/1 Bane as well as a 1/1 ward. The opponent has to ping off the Bane, they have to clear off the ward before they can get to the Medusa, or even if it lands on the same one, it's sort of a really annoying to clear if they don't have the ping for it. Just being sort of Blood's best proactive sort of 5-drop. If you're trying to snowball a board from nothing, you don't really need sort of like a board clear like a Salome, or like playing sort of this down where it's sort of vanilla. Just playing sort of a Medusa means you have a way to sort of like push board from neutral state, and you can maybe try to win the game off sort of your reach late game, or just board flooding your opponent out and them not being able to deal with all your answers, as well as just having the Medusa in your hand for the late game as sort of an extra control tool. This is definitely sort of the best 5-drop, even one of the best golden legendaries for Blood to take in the value department. As for the changelog, there's not too much in Bloodcraft's Golden Legendaries. Everything in sort of the Altar Sphere mini expansion stayed the same. The Lycos, you have other competing 2-drops, which are already sort of clunky to get their evos off, and they do more than just getting the Blood Moon. The Laura, the Vengeance tags are inconsistent for it, and then storming too early with the evo generally isn't very strong. The Agito went down, or it stayed down, mainly because you have more competing 5-drops now. It's inconsistent to get the self-pings for it, so most of the times it'll just be a 4-2, 4-3, and just be like a do-nothing body when you can just draft like even good stuff in like the silver and bronze slots as well. So moving on to the silver picks, we got the Sanguine Core. This card, unfortunately, is very similar to a Shadow's Core card, where it's sort of useless. And that's a shame, because Blood already has sort of a card that it sort of compares itself to in the Crimson Desire. It's a Evo Recovery card that wasn't very good either, but you sort of took it as sort of a one-of sometimes. A 3 play point deal to yourself, which didn't really matter, and then you recover 1 Evo point. So 3 play points to recover an Evo point. This one costs 7 to recover it. And then the sort of mid-game effect, where you just play this down as a do-nothing 3-drop, doesn't really do anything. So you play this down on sort of the Evo turns. You've already skipped like 3 points worth of tempo, and then you just have this do-nothing amulet that maybe it'll heal you for 4 or 5. It doesn't help you control board, or it doesn't help you establish on board, which are 2 things that Blood really wants. And the fact that you heal from like maybe 15 to 20, while that might be nice, it actually like takes away from sort of some Vengeance implications in the late game, where you might have something like a Dark General or some random Vengeance that you want to get into, that you can sort of hit yourself into it yourself if you're at like 12 or 14 life from either your opponent doing some residual chip damage or you hitting yourself for like random pings yourself, that you can actually knock yourself down to actual 10 to get those Vengeance chaos, where this takes away from that. There does have an implication in the late game, however. If you actually play this as sort of a do-nothing sun draw, the opponent's actually like forced to sort of snowball or actually like push for a board, and then it plays into sort of AoE effects in Blood. You have the Succubus, you have the Proto-Bahamut, and you have the Aryan. And it's unfortunate that they don't have sort of a revelation effect or like a really, really big AoE, maybe something like a really enhanced / self-pinged Evil Eye Demon, but that's also incredibly niche. But most of the times it'll only be AoE 2, AoE 3, so the opponent can just play like 2 mid-range followers, 1 really big follower, and then that plays around it. But the good news is you get the Evo point back from this, so you can actually Evo that really big follower you play, and then kill the really big follower, and then AoE everything else. It still has the problems of the opponent having like maybe two like 3-4 bodies or something, and then they're still like snowballed from there. But this is like sort of a neat application, only if you consistently have that sort of late game AoE to sort of complement it. And it's still like Evo recovery regardless. It has that sort of buffer of giving you a bunch of life in the late game that is sometimes relevant. Sort of dodging like a bunch of lethals and sort of mitigating all the damage from 1 turn. Sort of like a Crow Amulet that also gives you the Evo back, where this one actually might put you into lethal too quickly. So, and there's like no other sort of bad silver pick to sort of push this card even further. So this card is technically draftable if you want to like dodge a Lust or something. So the Hellblaze Demon, 2 play point 2/2 ward. It's already like a playable stat line here, like the Veteran Lancer. And it has like some mini upside. It relies on you snowballing, and most of the time you won't land like you can't construct a level combo with this with like a mono. So most of the time you'll just land on something random. Maybe you can get like a Berserk Demon combo or just some Salome to get boosted up. But it doesn't matter a lot of time. Most of the times it's just a 2/2 ward with like some upside of giving a random Bloodcraft follower or 1 extra attack, 2 extra attack to be like a bit more annoying to clear, or to hit harder, or to actually like trade with more stuff. So you're just like reasonably happy to sort of take this here as sort of a defensive drop with some minor upside attached. Last up for the silver picks, we got the Metal Blade Demon. This card might be actually surprising sort of seeing this card here. It's the inconsistent of the Fanfare effect and the Evo effect. So starting with the Evo effect, 2 Machina cards in your hand. While that is consistent and constructed, you can build your deck around having a lot of Machinas, a lot of sort of the neutral Machinas, as well as just having a bunch of Unleash the Nightmares to actually fuel your hand. In Take 2, it's definitely not very consistent to actually get this off. You're already pressured to play a lot of your Armored Bats out on like 3 or 4 anyway, if you can't afford to hold them for 6. So just not being able to get the Evo effect off most of the times means this is restricted to being a lot of the times 4/3, which is under vanilla, that draws you a card, which can be like reasonably good in the value plan, but it's not like super amazing in that sense compared to like some of these cards, which are generally good most of the time. As for the changelogs in the silver picks, the Pomeran's actually an interesting one to consider bumping up because of Craft's sort of less willingness to draft hard removal, as well as less access to a lot of hard removals. If you play this down alongside a snowball board, it doesn't matter that it has this deal 3 to itself downside at the beginning of the turn. The opponent still has to get through all 10 of its defense in order to access the rest of your board. It's mainly just competition with sort of other cards in the Bloodcraft's draft. The Packbound Demon, especially sort of in the same slot where just vanilla draws you 3 cards, which is very strong. As well as the Armored Bat, which sort of does its job very similarly, just as good. It'll be like a 7/7 ward when it evos, and it even has the upside of just giving you 2 assembly droids when it dies. So that's mainly the reason why this card can't really bump up. Bump down is mainly the Dark Elemental. You can always bump like these 2 cards alongside each other. I only take these away just because there's like a fine gap between like these cards and these cards. It's like these sort of 5 cards, and I just want to like separate these cards. Otherwise, you're just like drafting them all alongside each other. And I consider these cards like the general strong vanilla cards, where like something like the Metal Blade Demon, when it's vanilla-ish, it's like reasonable. It's not like super amazing. And similar with like the Dark Elemental, it's sometimes just like a big dumb follower, and then sometimes it has the upside. Sometimes this Vengeance can be a downside, like I've said before, as well as sometimes you not wanting to trade and this Fanfare actually being inconsistent to sort of get off to actually get the benefit from. So moving on to the bronze picks, I'm actually just going to cover the changelog mainly because it's 2. The Dark General just bumped down by 1 mainly because there's another vanilla 4-drop in the pool that you can sort of draft over it, because this is inconsistent to get off like always, just because of the Vengeance being sort of a late game implication that your opponent can always play around it, and you can't always control it to actually get the benefit from. The Arian's down 1 mainly because of sort of other good stuff in the pool. It's not good to sort of rely on just drafting, even though you can actually just play these as sort of angelic barrages, Force of the Dragoneers for 3 or something. It's not good to sort of like rely on just drafting a bunch of these and trying to win off that. It is like a reasonably strong card. It's mainly just sort of the same thing with the Magic Blade Mage and Rune, where it's just not good to sort of clunk up on a bunch of these as sort of late game drops. It's always very strong as sort of a 1 of or 2 of. Definitely a reasonable card to take. It's just bumped down mainly to make way for some other really value sort of mid game, early game cards. So going into the new picks, we got the Liberté. This card's probably one of the worst Evo Matters cards that any craft got, mainly because it doesn't interact with board. Just playing this down, just 2/2, Evo something alongside it, you just get a free ping to your opponent's face and restore 2. The restore 2 a lot of times doesn't matter. Similarly, like I said in the Sanguine Core, just sometimes you don't want to restore a bunch of defense to your health, and sometimes your life total doesn't matter, especially if you're sort of an aggressive deck. Deal 1 to your damage to your opponent's leader is like reasonably decent, but it's not like super amazing. Like maybe you can have this live and just ping like 2, ping 3 if you're really lucky, but most of the time it's not like super reasonably premium. And then like the 7-drop application of it, it's like a bit small. It's like a curate, which is sort of funny. 5/5 heal. It can't heal like other followers, of course, but like healing 4 to your face is like reasonable sometimes it does end up like being good. And then deal 2 to your opponent's face, sometimes that can be like decent chip damage, like a 5/5 that pings for 2. Sometimes crafts like Sword, they play like War Dog or like a 3/3 for 6 just to get the extra free chip damage, and sometimes that can be like enough to close out a game. Most of the times you just play it as like a 3-drop. You'll pick it and play it as a 2-drop if you don't have enough, or to sort of complement the Succubus, complement the Subliminal Lust if you can't actually get enough of it, and you're like reasonably happy to just pick this up, just being a 2-drop that's not like a 1/3, because they don't have like some Blickens anymore to complement these kind of cards. So the Berserk Demon, this is a new inclusion 4-drop. It's sort of just another big dumb follower, like I said, with the Dark Elemental. Sometimes they just do nothing. You can get the sort of constructed level combo, or like the mini combo where you prefer this. Maybe you go first, you prefer, and then this becomes a 6/4, and then it gets the free rush on it. And you can rush it into something, and that's like reasonably premium. And you have like a 6/2, 6/1 left over, and the opponent actually has to clear it with an Evo ping, or even worse, just clear it with like a standard Evo, like 1 or 2 drop, and actually like crash into it just because they're really scared of the 6 attack. So like sometimes it can be end up being really good, but other times it's just vanilla. And most of the times you want like these to be sort of your 4-drops, just because they're so much stronger. Like Split Board is so much stronger than just like one big dumb follower, just because the opponent can just remove it with like a standard removal alongside it, especially when it's like traded after. So the Armored Bat, I've talked about this before with sort of the other cards in Blood. It has a lot of synergy with them, just general board flood, as well as just Machina synergies or board flood synergies. It's a very respectable 3-drop, just a Bone Chimera in Bloodcraft. It's very comparable to something like a Nightmare Devil. The Nightmare Devil did some things better, like just being a split board, even though it was more vulnerable to actually being cleared. Sometimes there was some upside to playing that, but they were both like reasonably good 3-drops. So this one will definitely do a good job sort of inheriting its like a 3-drop sort of slot. It's especially good because it has sort of an enhanced 6 that's actually really premium, just a 5/5 ward that spawns 2 1/1s after. The fact that it's flexible in the early game, like really good for the board flood early game, and then into the late game, it's just a very solid value body that you'll be very happy to take, especially Blood's 6-drops. You're mainly just playing the pack bound in this card, so just having a really good 6-drop to fill in the slot, being sort of able to evo on 6, makes it a very strong card. Last up for the bronze picks, we got the Viper Lash. This is sort of the zombie party and Bloodcraft. This card's actually very interesting, sort of not the power creep, but sort of the evolution of sort of Blood's 3 damage ping 4. They've had just 3 damage ping 4 with like pseudo downside of like pinging your own followers, maybe giving it drain. They've had the 3 damage deal 4 that actually adds the serpent to your hand, and now it's just 3 damage deal 4, and then it actually spawns the serpent outright. It's worth noting that this is actually random, so there is like some pseudo downside to it if the opponent has like a really split board, and there's also like the pseudo upside of actually hitting something with ambush or just hitting something behind a ward that you normally couldn't reach. And then the fact that it summons a 1/1 though, it makes it just reasonably premium. You can like evo stuff alongside it, clear whatever you want to clear with the evo, and then the 4 damage you can sort of control where it hits. And then the fact that it has like sort of enhanced 6 like later, where it's actually just a bunch of like four fours worth of stat lines on board alongside the sort of pseudo controllable ping, that makes this card really strong. Just a flexible early game, flexible late game sort of removal options. Definitely one of the things that'll sort of propel Blood up once it probably gets like some really good standalone golden legendary picks. It's already fine in like the silver picks and the bronze picks. It has one of the best like bronze suites in like all the crafts, as well as just having a reasonable silver pick collection. It's mainly just because of their game plan just being so linear. Like if you play against Blood, all you need to do is just clear their board and like stay even on board, and most of the time you win. They don't have sort of like that unfair late game win condition or just some unfair mid game that they can just sort of beat you out with. It's at most it's like sort of like playing a Medusa, which is like extremely premium. But most of the time, it's just playing like a fair aggro game, then trying to win the game off that, or just drafting enough value to actually outvalue your opponent. But most of the time, that's like reasonable. They don't have to like too much like unfair stuff going for them. So hopefully they'll get some new stuff in the future. Anyway, I guess that's it. I'll see you guys in the next one.